From the Foundation Studio right here on Biloxi's Back Bay, I want to welcome you to Super Talk Outdoors, where we celebrate and are honored to celebrate the incredible world-class outdoors of the state of Mississippi every single Monday at lunchtime. So thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. The feedback we get from across the state is truly appreciated. We really appreciate when you reach out to us and give us your comments and send us your suggestions. We really appreciate that. I want to thank you for joining us on the powerful Super Talk Mississippi Radio Network or on Super Talk TV at C Spire TV. But if you are listening on Facebook or YouTube or your favorite podcast, it is October the 3rd, 2022. I was outside a few minutes ago talking to my wife, Ann, and we were amazed that it's already October. I know that in February I said, can you believe this year is going by so quickly? And here we are. It's October. It's starting to get cool. We're getting a little Christmas in the air. And folks are beginning to think about deer hunting and duck hunting. In fact, we're going to spend the whole show today talking about whitetail deer, but we'll be back on that in just a second. It was another incredibly beautiful weekend across the state of Mississippi, getting, as I said, some of that cool weather. People are out planting their food plots, and they need some rain. And boy, if you look at the forecast, it doesn't look so hot. I noticed that our friend Cuz Strickland posted a picture of him on a tractor, and he said, against my better judgment, I went ahead and planted all my food plots. No rain predicted in the near future, but maybe we'll get lucky. And then he went on to actually mention that he's going to be testing a no-till spot this year. We're actually going to do that, too, with the help of my friend Travis Dunn, and he's our farmer that we lease 3 separate farms from. With his help, we actually are going to try a no-till drill this year at one of the farms, and we're looking forward to seeing how that works out. I think, as my guest will attest to it here in just a second, when you get your pH right, the no-till approach works really well. So we're gonna test it. We're going to be planting all of our food plots this coming weekend. It's just sort of the way it works. And when you got a bunch of guys that come together from all over, you have to plan it ahead of time. You know, we unfortunately aren't able to say we're going to plant it. We're going to plant when we know there's rain coming. If you look at the next couple of weeks, there's only like 20% chance of rain is the highest in the next couple of weeks. We're hoping that changes. We planted this time of year every year, and we've had good luck. I was talking to my friend Spike Crawford. He's our seed and fertilizer guy that we've been using for many years, and he said he's been super busy. In fact, this is what he said. He said things are going really well. Fertilizer and seed prices are up, just like everything else, but people are still putting money into recreational things they enjoy. Yeah. As for the food plot business, it is going strong. You know, a person really loves the outdoors and especially hunting, but he's going to cut back on milk and bread, but he's going to take care of the deer herd. Then he always ends up saying thanks and be safe. I'm not surprised, because one of the things that COVID and the pandemic sort of reminded us of is our love of the outdoors. And when we talk to people from the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries and Parks, they tell us that there have been record numbers of people going into the woods and enjoying the outdoors because they felt safe outside. And so, you know, to hear Spike talk about people really, continuing to invest in the recreational things they enjoy, especially things like, planting food plots, great to hear. And I'm not surprised to hear it. If you look on social media, you can see that the bow hunters are out in full force. And we'll be talking more about that with our guests here shortly. On the coast, again, an amazingly beautiful weekend. One of the things I enjoy doing is riding my bike. I'm about 3 miles from the beach. So I'll ride down to the beach and go on what is called the Beach Boardwalk in Biloxi. And it's just a beautiful stretch of a boardwalk where you can really kind of take in the beauty of coastal Mississippi. Mayor Fofo Gillage of the city of Biloxi has this wonderful vision for connecting Back Bay to the main beach with boardwalks, and it's coming together very, very nicely. Yesterday, Cruising the Coast started, and cars from all makes and all kinds of years were here from all over the country, and they will be for the next week. Also internationally, I might add. This year is going to be a record year. We'll be having a live remote from Biloxi's Town Green on Wednesday to talk more about that. And you can tell people really are enjoying themselves. This is actually a very unique cruising event because it has multiple cities engaged simultaneously. from one point, say, as far over as Waveland, the other as far over as Moss Point. So you have this 40-mile stretch of beach and stops along the way, and these special events they have throughout the week. It's really, really a cool event. It is the ultimate cruising event, and in fact, it's been voted like the top event year after year in terms of all over America. You know, this Cruising the Coast event is that important. Another first this weekend. You know, when you're enjoying the outdoors, you never know where you're going to find sort of a new experience. But my son Jordan and I and his two kids, Liam and Mila, went down to the pier yesterday to check our crab traps. And while we were there, we decided to get in the Triton, and that way it could sort of contain the kids. Jordan decided to make a few casts, and almost immediately he caught a flounder. And then he continued to cast over toward the pier next to ours, and he caught a bass, and then another bass, and then another bass. All in all, I caught like 5 bass. It was really incredible fishing. But what we think is that since the tide was super low, the flats were actually exposed. That pushed all the fish into the deep areas around our pier. So it was just one of those unusual events. We caught it right. It was super special. Incidentally, Canadian geese were all around us feeding while we were doing this. It was really cool. I actually posted a video from that experience yesterday at the Super Talk Outdoors Facebook page if you want to go take a look at it. And while you're there, like our page. We really appreciate that. All the videos for this show, all our incredible guests are posted there, so you can actually go back and catch up on shows you might have missed along the way. So cool experience here in coastal Mississippi. We'll be up in the Mississippi Delta this weekend, as I mentioned, planning. Can't wait to get up there and take in that special place. So it's a very, very special place on earth. Now let's move to my friend William McKinley. He's the Deer Program Coordinator for the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries and Parks, and he's also a regular on this show. William, how you doing, my friend?
I'm good, Ricky. Good.
So how often do you get to come down to the coast?
Very infrequent. I'm actually coming down pretty close tomorrow, one county above, to do a presentation tomorrow night down in Stone and Pearl River County, their county forestry association. So I'll be close, but I won't hit the big water. So
I would assume, William, you're in high demand this time of year. I mean, people are starting to get into that deer mode. You probably have people reaching out to you in all kinds of ways this time of year, don't you?
You know, I didn't go to school to be a wildlife vet by any means, and nor am I, but I get so many sick deer photos this time of year, just common things. People want to know, and we're that contact. I get pictures of big deer. I get pictures of deer asking me what I think this deer will age. It's almost a steady stream coming in, and I love that. That's what I've devoted my career to. So yes, I would say
when you talk about
deer biologist is busy.
Yeah. When you talk about devoting your career, you really do mean it. I mean, and you and I have chatted about this before, but the number of people in the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries and Parks who have literally dedicated their lives so that we can leave a legacy for our kids and our kids' kids. And I've had people on this show who literally have pointed to you as the reason why they got into conservation efforts to begin with. Do you feel the fact that you've had that kind of impact
Ricky.
on people?
I said that's humbling. You know, I look at this as we devoted our career to be a public servant, and a public servant to both the hunting public and to the wildlife resource out there. And it pits us in the middle sometimes, because sometimes the recommendation may not be exactly in public opinion, and sometimes we have to balance that. It's kind of difficult to put into words, but it puts us, our obligation is the wildlife resource. And we have to take care of that for future generations. You know, Ricky, I got a daughter that has started deer hunting with me, and she took a couple of deer last year and took 2 the year before. And I've been joking around, but very serious. I manage this resource very selfishly. I want this resource there for her and for when she gives me grandchildren, I can take grandkids. So we look at this long term.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, it could be the work that you do could lead to I don't know, regulations or recommended regulations that could limit people's ability to enjoy the herd the way they want to. Not everybody gets what they want in this world, especially when you have conservation. CWD, I think, is probably a tough subject to talk about these days, but certainly that also has a limiting aspect. It also is very focused on the future and legacies, et cetera. When we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with William McKinley, and we're going to talk about white-tailed deer. We're going to talk about challenges and opportunities about this great state and why I often say this is the capital of the outdoors. One of the reasons why is because we have some of the best deer hunting in the entire United States right here in Mississippi. We'll see you after this break.
Leading the conversation on Mississippi's outdoors. It's Super Talk Outdoors with Ricky Matthews on Super Talk Mississippi.
Welcome back to Super Talk Outdoors. I have my friend William T. McKinley. He's head of the deer program for the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries and Parks. William, you heard that it was an Instagram post that Cuz Strickland made where he said, against my better judgment, I went ahead and planted all my food plots. I bet you're hearing that a lot these days, aren't you?
I sure am. It's dusty, it's dry. There's a little moisture left in the soil, but that could actually be bad if we don't get rain in the next few weeks. So the good news is I hadn't seen any 90s in the forecast. Yeah. And, that seed can hold on if it germinates, if it's got a little moisture, as long as it doesn't get too hot. So, but we may lose a little germination to the heat, but it's always a balancing act. Is it dry enough to plant? Yeah, it's plenty dry enough, but is it going to be too dry? Or is it too wet? If we wait till it rains, you gotta, at some point you pull the trigger, you go out there, you put the seed in the ground and you pray for rain. But, Ricky, I often heard it said that a good rain dance has a lot to do with timing. So,
hey, do you know one? Anyhow. Do you know a good rain dance?
No, unfortunately, I don't.
Hey, I talked to my friend Travis Dunn. As I mentioned, the Dunn family's been really good to us, and we leased 3 farms from them. And he's finishing up his harvesting today, for a matter of fact. And he had corn and soybeans, a lot more soybeans than he normally has, but the cotton, he's finishing up the cotton today. But boy, this weather's worked good for our farmers, though. You think about harvesting. And other than like a 3 or 4 day period of rain, very intensive rain, when soybeans were at their most vulnerable moment, causing some of them obviously to germinate a little bit. Other than that, it's been a really good season for the most part. I know there's been some stretches without rain. They've had to do irrigation, et cetera. And for those without irrigation, it's been a challenge. But been good for them from a harvesting point of view. You've probably been hearing that from a lot of people.
Yes, it is definitely. On a smaller scale, I grow a big garden myself. It's been really good for it this fall, but I've seen all the corn around home here in north central Mississippi has been harvested in the past week. Conditions are just right for harvesting right now. So a lot of grain getting dispersed out there, and that agriculture is so big in our state. It is, and I actually was putting together a presentation this week for tonight, as a matter of fact, that compares agriculture to other things. And it's just that ag component, we sometimes maybe underestimate how much it matters to our deer herd. The problem, Ricky, is balancing that deer herd so that you don't have so many deer that are damaging that crop. And thus the farmer has to either remove deer or exclude deer from that crop, and they can no longer get to that crop. So it's a balancing act there, assuming some loss that helps the deer, but not too much that they have to be excluded from the field. So it's another balancing act that we have to play as the wildlife agency, being in the middle of that. So,
I've learned a lot from you, and it's been terrific getting to know what you are teaching and what you're learning. And you've done such a great job of sharing it. But I think about the farms that I have, I don't look at the camera surveys that we do the same anymore, because I always wondered, we get this big deer on camera and then we wouldn't see him again. Or maybe we might see one that we think is him toward the end of the season, but we didn't see him at all during the season. We've got a good mix of land, some in the hills, some relatively large tracts of woods or cut over. Lots of land that is adjacent to farmland. So when you have farmland, especially when you have something like soybeans or corn, you'll get deer coming in there from all over the place, and you'll see them about this time of year, and then slowly but surely you don't see them anymore. Some will stay. Some you won't see again. Some you might see at the end of the season. But you've done a good job of educating me that a third of them probably going to hang around. A third of them are going to start to drift away, might come back. Some of them might go a long way away. You may never see them again. But
That's right,
it's hard to know at this moment in time, when you do a camera survey and you get these incredible deer on camera, it's hard to know which ones of those are going to hang around, isn't it?
You don't know which ones. But the same deer that hangs around this year is the same deer that usually hangs around next year. They are very predictable if you can ever see that big pattern. Here's what the research told us. Deer tend to go through a fairly large shift around August. And so that shift has already occurred by the time you're running cameras September, October. They tend to go through another shift within their home range about the end of October, early November. So where you're seeing that deer this week, he may not take a huge jaunt, but he may shift to a whole different 300 or 400 acres within the 1,000 acres he's using. And so where you're getting a lot of pictures of him, right now, is he'll be living in an entirely different area. He might come back through and visit it, but overall, imagine his home range is 1,000 acres. That's roughly an average.
Yeah.
He lives in this 200 for this part of the year and this 200 and shifts over, and it's not exactly 200, but you get the point there. He's shifting within that. So I caution hunters, if you're putting all your eggs in the basket of where you get a picture of him this week and next week, you better keep looking, because he'll be totally different by the time gun season opens up.
Well,
that was nearly every deer.
And then conversely, deer that start showing up the second and third week in November, now that's more probably your target deer, wouldn't you say? It
is. They're going to stay there, except for when the rut kicks in full. They're going to take an excursion. Every buck we've had GPS collars on takes an excursion, and most of the time that's miles. He goes off chasing girls for a day or two, and then he comes home, unless he runs into somebody who is lucky enough to see him 3 miles over and go, where did this thing come from? He just walked out and I've never seen him before. And some guy's 4 miles down the road waiting on him to come back and never sees him again. That's the reality that plays out every year. No matter how good you manage, he's still going to go off during the rut and go spread himself around a little.
We had my buddy Jake Carter from here down on the coast that hunts with us. He's almost like a son to me. He's been hunting and fishing with me most of his life because his dad doesn't hunt or fish. He loves to be in the outdoors, but he doesn't hunt and fish. So I sort of adopted him as an outdoor son. But he was the last hunt of last year. He killed a really nice 8-point on an area where we had a fairly extensive camera survey leading up to that, and we'd never seen that deer before. It just showed up out of nowhere. But you hear that all the time. You just said it, but it's true. I mean, you never can assume that just because you don't have deer on camera doesn't mean that big boy might show up this morning. That's
right. And then the other side of that I mentioned earlier is somebody probably had deer too miles away and is wondering why he didn't show back up, and never put the two together because he went so far. I heard a good friend of mine, my oldest over at Arkansas, tell some guys, he said, that deer's not loyal to you.
Hey, tell us, the last time you and I visited, you told the story of the deer that swam. You had a doe and a buck that swam the Mississippi River. For people who missed that, why don't you tell that story again?
Okay, so the buck swam the river. We caught him 2 years ago in winter, and come March of 21, he swam across. He took a 32-mile journey to go 18 miles point to point, and he lived in Louisiana from March until August. Come August, the beginning of August, he jumped back in the river, followed the exact same route back, 32 miles again, and wound back up within a few hundred yards of where we caught him. He repeated that within a week of the same time this year in 22. In March, he jumped in the river, he went around, he went straight back to that same ag field, then he came back. So he's back right in where we caught him at right now, and he's made his journey. The doe actually went, she didn't swim the river, she went north 14 and a half miles, and then she came right back in June. Well, this year, she went east, and for relation, this doe was down near Eagle Lake. Mm-hmm. So she was right near the Eagle Lake community. The water came up, and her movement was water induced. There was a lot of dry land between her and where she went. She went up Highway 3 all the way to Dump Lake in Yazoo County, 26 miles, stayed there until 3 weeks ago, and came right back to where we caught her at. So the movement of these deer, I mean, we got 4 deer collared. One went 18 miles west, one went 26 miles east from the same location.
Wow. Well, we're going to talk more about that when we come back, but that is like fascinating information. And it just, for a deer hunter, it helps you understand you never, ever can know for sure. You think you do, but you do not. This is William McKinley, head of the deer program for the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries and Parks. And when we come back, we'll continue this fascinating conversation.
Just carry on. I'll carry on. Mississippi and fall football.
Welcome back to Super Talk Outdoors. I have my friend William McKinley, head of the deer program for the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries and Parks. And, you know, William, it occurred to me as I was thinking about this during the break, you don't have to be a deer hunter to be fascinated by this conversation that we're having today about deer movement and activity. And, you know, it's some of them are so predictable, some of them are semi-predictable, and some of them are completely unpredictable. But those stories, I mean, for example, when you think about a doe, you don't think about a doe going over 20 miles. You think about a doe sort of hanging around that food plot and, you know, being, you know, you're taught that there's going to be sort of this doe group, and then there's going to be a buck bed somewhere behind that doe group, and he's going to hang out there, and that's going to be his spot. And maybe he has 2 or 3 buck beds, but it, you know, for some deer it is like that, but for most deer it's not like that. And what other things have you discovered as you've done these collars?
Well, you know, those deer we just talked about, well, yeah, their movements initially were water induced from flooding, Mississippi River flooding. Let's move over to the Big Black in a study where we had 55 bucks, 3-year-old and older bucks wearing GPS collars. We're taking a reading every 15 minutes from September to February. And we had one of those particular bucks was going 14 miles, but he was crossing the Big Black 3 times to take that trip. He had his specific route that he was going, put a radio collar on him, he takes off, he goes west, he's just west of I-55 when we catch him by maybe a mile and a half. He takes off. He crosses Highway 49, basically coming within sight of a gas station there at Bentonia. One of the pings put him right outside the parking lot. He crosses 49. He hits the river again. He crosses it again, and he goes down, and he lives on a small track down in southern Yazoo County. He came right back to where we caught him, and he did that trip 2 times. Now, the collar life lasts about 1.5 to 2 years on these things. So, you know, by that point, and by those others I mentioned, their collars are now, the batteries are going dead. So, but to see them repeat journeys like that, and the doe was the most unpredictable one in that she went to 2 different places. The bucks tended to go right back and forth. But every buck we had in that study on the Big Black was taking an excursion of a few miles during the rut. And some of them took as many as 10 or 12 excursions, where he would come home, if you could call it home, stay a little while, he'd take off again. And so that need to roam was in that buck to go out and try to find a receptive doe somewhere. And just say again, you just never know. Get out there and go hunting. Doesn't matter what you're seeing on the trail cam. Get out and go hunting. Hunt corridors. By the way, those bucks on some of these properties could easily cross an open field and only have to go 100 or 200 yards. Instead, they would circle the entire agricultural complex, staying in the woods to go from point A to point B. He could walk 200 yards. He would walk 1.5 miles to go to the same point instead. That's what 3-year-old bucks are doing. These mature deer, they don't like exposing themselves.
Wow. So yeah, that's why getting into cover, like some of the land we have, something that would fit that description would be, there's a river, and then there's some woods. It's not super, thick. It's just thick woods, of course, but it's not super wide. And then there's ag land. So in those woods is where you want to be. That
is exactly. Now you know as well as I, somebody's going to harvest a good deer in a field, and he's going to follow a doe out or come to a bean field or whatever. A green field, but his normal day-to-day movements, he's up moving a lot more than you realize. We found that out. They're moving. They're just holding to the best cover around there. The end result was, if you find the thickest cover on your property and hunt there, you limit your visibility, but that's where that's where those older bucks are gonna use.
William, what's interesting, you know this story I'm about to tell really well, but because our camp has behind it about 400 acres, and then in the middle of that 400 acres is a 100-acre cypress swamp. Okay, and then it's on the outside edges it's all woods. Inevitably, every year, sometimes it's an old just an old swamp donkey, and sometimes it may be a young buck, but inevitably, because we're at the camp a lot, in the middle of the morning, 9, 10, 11 o'clock, suddenly we'll see a worn-out doe that can't hardly walk because she's out of breath, out in the middle of the field, in the middle of the daylight, with a buck locked down on him, and maybe 2 younger bucks trying to get to her, and he's not going to let them get to her. That is a fascinating thing, man. I mean, we'll go around on the truck, and we'll get over next to the lake and get really close to the deer, and he will not spook and he will not move. He's just guarding that doe. But that's the classic lockdown scenario, isn't it?
It is. He's with one doe. And by the way, a lot of the thought out there is, I want to keep more does on my property so that I'll have more bucks on my property. Is there any truth to that? Well, maybe. Here's the problem with that though, Ricky. When you've got one doe that comes into heat and you have a lot of competition for her, bucks will not allow her to stay still. They're nudging her, they're pushing at her. If it's one buck with one doe, they're just going to bed, and his movement is entirely dependent on her movement. If it's 3 or 4 bucks chasing a doe, they will not let her, well, bottom line, they don't let her rest very much. They're up and moving, so you're going to see more of that rutting activity by harvesting more does early. People have this mentality, I want to keep the does on my place and then I'll harvest them late. They could save food for their younger bucks and have a better hunt during the rut if they would take those does at the beginning of the season. Use that early primitive weapon season that's does only. Use it. Go out there, get some does out. Let things settle down some after the opening of gun season. Harvest a few more. Let it settle down. Let the rut start kicking in, and go out there and enjoy some of the best rut hunting you've seen.
Yeah. What great advice. Look, one of our newest farms is about 250 acres. Now, to give you a sense, it's not 250 acres in a block. It's along a river. So from one point to the other point, it's about 2.3 miles along the river, and it's got some open spaces in between. But we harvested a few does last year. We're just trying to get a feel for it. But as the season went on, we could see that there were too many does on this property, and now we've got some cameras out, and my son Jordan said that he'll have a camera view of maybe 8 does in one frame, and that's one of the things you asked me before. You said, "Okay, how many does do you see in one picture?" Well, clearly on this piece of property, which hasn't been hunted very much over the last several years, we need to go in there and harvest some does, don't we?
I would agree. Yes, removing some of the does out early, increase competition for breeding rights when the rut kicks in, and just think that doe's eating 5 to 8 pounds of food a day. Say you harvest her in early November instead of early January. 60 days earlier, 60 times, let's say she's eating 10 pounds, a bigger doe in the Delta eat nearly 10 pounds a day. You just save 600 pounds of food per doe that you harvest early. That 600 pounds goes into that 1-year-old 5-point so that he gets better and makes better antlers later on. So time in a year matters. It matters in a lot of aspects. So that's just good sound biology. Take them out early, then let things settle down and enjoy a rut hunt. And then at the end of the season, if you hadn't got the number you need, take a few more does out. That's the way I like to try to manage my clubs. But taking the number out is more important. You've got to get enough off the landscape for the big picture, but take them out early.
It's interesting because when you and I talked about this last year, it is probably still, even though it's something that you create clarity around constantly, it's probably still the biggest question you get. Do you harvest does early or late? On opening weekend, should you be harvesting any does? Are you going to scare bucks away if you harvest does on opening weekend? You get all those questions constantly, don't you?
Constantly. There was a study in I think it came out of Auburn or no, it came out of UGA, where they radio collared a bunch of deer to see when they hunted a place, how long it took bucks to get back on their normal pattern. It took about a week. Actually, it was like 5 to 6 days, and they tended to kind of forget what was going on there, what had happened. So once again, use the early part of gun season. It's not a whole lot of adult bucks usually harvested the first of gun season around Thanksgiving. You get some, but really December's when it kicks off in Mississippi, and the rut starts kicking in. You want those does harvested before then if you can.
When we come back for the final segment, we'll talk a little bit about supplemental feeding, and I want to get the latest on CWD. What's the position from the department on CWD these days? We'll see you after this break.
I said, 1 Mississippi, there's a magnolia tree. 2 Mississippi, where a mockingbird sings out on his limb, whistling that sweet soul for him. I said, 3 Mississippi, to this land called home. I'll breathe Mississippi till I'm dead and gone. Just carry on, I'll carry on, Mississippi.
We live in one of the best places in America to enjoy the outdoors. So let's talk about it. It's Super Talk Outdoors with Ricky Matthews on Super Talk Mississippi.
It's kudzu walls and fall football.
Welcome back to Coast. You have my friend William McKinley, who's head of the deer program for the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. And we've covered a lot of ground today. It's been a lot of fun. I really enjoy him. I told him during the break that he's a terrific communicator. And he said, well, he's been doing it for over 20 years. And I said, well, there's people who've done things for over 20 years that still can't communicate worth it. You know why? But he's really good at it. He's passionate. And as he pointed out, I mean, he really knows that the work that he's doing is going to help our kids and our kids' kids be able to enjoy this incredible resource in Mississippi. And by the way, we're going to be able to enjoy it better because of the work that they've been doing. And the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks is just full of people like William McKinley. And we're really, really blessed to have so many incredible, dedicated people on the staff at the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. Okay, so William, what's your current thinking about supplemental feeding?
So, Ricky, we did a survey of DMAP properties back a few years ago and asked them if they supplemental fed or not. And then we ranked that according to, okay, well, is that one feeder in the back of the camp that you watch deer, or is it an actual feeding program? And what we found is while supplemental feeding has shown in places to help, the way it was being conducted in Mississippi at that point was not making a difference. We compared body weights, we compared antler growth, and we compared harvest rates. There was no difference in fed versus unfed in body weights. This was out of about 500 properties in Mississippi that said they were on a feeding program. So there was no difference in body weights. There was no difference in antler size. The only difference we saw was the properties that were feeding actually harvested less deer than the properties that were not feeding. And we've got studies showing that bucks tend to avoid feeders. Now, if things are limiting, if food and nutrition is limited on your property, then certainly supplemental feeding in a right, proper manner can improve body weights. What I'm saying there is the way that it was being done on average across our state, and when we did the study a few years ago, was not making an impact. So I'm not going to say it can't help, but I'm going to say there's a lot of risk associated with doing it as well. Plus, it is quite expensive. So every land manager out there, deer manager, has to decide, is that risk worth the effort for what they own their particular property? And that's where we can help with site-specific applications. So,
of our 3 farms, we're going to do supplemental feeding on one of the farms this year. And our thinking there is that the way this farm is sort of laid out, there's a highway through it in one section. So it's kind of sectioned off, and it's got a lot of competition around the outside of it, and they're all supplementally feeding. So our thought is, what we're going to do is we're going to set them up, fill them up, and we're going to hopefully have most of them as spinner feeders, so we can have it spin only for 3 or 4 seconds, just a little bit. And that way we can limit the number of times we actually have to re-enter that area to fill it. Because I know that's part of the problem. You go in there, every time you go in there, whether it be a 4-wheeler or a truck or whatever, and you drive up to that thing and you fill it up. If you're doing that on a regular basis, every time you do it, you're probably exponentially reducing the opportunity you're going to see a mature deer. Is that a true statement?
It is. And that same study on Big Black, it used 75,000 acres and almost 40 landowners. So you can imagine, some were feeding, some were not. So we GPSed all the feeder locations to see how often these bucks used them. Absolutely, some of these mature bucks used them. They used the feeders, but almost exclusively at night. Yeah. So younger deer and does were using them more during the day, but those older age class bucks tended to avoid them during daylight hours. And once again, I'll simply say there is risk involved there. There's disease transmission risk. There is cost. Every deer manager has to make that decision. Is the risk worth the reward if they want to supplementally feed?
So, William, in the short time we have left, you can give me an update about this, but it's interesting to me because I spent a lot of time at various hunter sites on social media. And anytime CWD comes up, you still have those people that believe there's a conspiracy theory and it's always been there. We just got to learn to live with it and whatever, that managing it won't do a bit of good. There's a tremendous amount of misinformation about CWD, isn't there?
There is. And, MSU got to lean on them heavily. They do so much research and deer research. One of the leaders in the country, they were doing one study in North Mississippi, Southwest Tennessee, where they actually asked landowners and hunters that are in the hot CWD zone. Some of their biggest comments were, there is so much misinformation and simple ignorance on this disease out there. That's coming from people in the zone.
Well, what we should do is, in the next time we visit, we'll kind of get a more detailed update. But if people want to know more about CWD, they can go to the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks and see where the CWD zones are, see what the regulations are around that, et cetera. But the department's doing their best to sort of do the best they can to address and sort of limit the spread of CWD. But anyway, that's all the time we have for today. William McKinley, head of the deer program for the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. It has been a pleasure, my friend.
Thank you, Ricky. I've enjoyed it.
You bet. Hey, listen, have a great week. Be safe out there planting. Be especially safe. God bless you, and we'll see you next Monday. Welcome back to Super Talk Outdoors. I have my friend William McKinley, head of the deer program for the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. And, you know, William, it occurred to me as I was